Disclaimer: this is a fictional dramatization created for artistic, emotional, and educational storytelling purposes. All characters and events are entirely fictional and created using AI tools. No impersonation, misrepresentation, or harm is intended. The content contains scenes of danger involving child characters. However, no real persons or minors were involved in its production. Grace's Love Stories produces scripted, AI-generated stories that promote, entertain, inspire kindness, and emotional connection. We respect our viewers and strictly adhere to YouTube's policies.
The wind was a blade against her skin, each gust slicing through the threadbare wool of her cloak. Elara knelt in the snow, the cold seeping through the knees of her worn trousers, a familiar ache that had become a constant companion. Before her stood a simple, unadorned stone marker, half buried in a fresh drift of white. It was her mother's grave, the only place in this vast, unforgiving world where she felt something other than the crushing weight of her own worthlessness. Here, there was only grief, a clean and honest pain that was a welcome respite from the shame that usually choked her. Her own wolf, a creature as pale and fragile as she was, whimpered softly in the back of her mind, its misery a mirror of her own. She traced the frozen letters of her mother's name, Lyra, with a numb fingertip. It had been a year since the sickness had taken her, a year since Elara's last shield against the pack's cruelty had crumbled to dust. Her mother had been the only one who had ever looked at her white hair and pale, pink-tinged eyes, and seen beauty instead of a curse. To everyone else in the Shadow Moon pack, she was an ill omen, a flaw in their bloodline, an albino, an omega, the lowest of the low, made even worse by the genetic quirk that left her and her wolf form stark white, a ghost in a world of rich, dark fur. A tremor ran through her, not just from the cold. It was the memory, sharp and jagged as broken glass, of her rejection ceremony. It had been on her 18th birthday, the day she was meant to find her mate, her other half. The moon goddess had indeed blessed her, or so she had thought for one fleeting, foolish moment. The bond had snapped into place with him, the pack's prized future alpha Kale. He was everything. She was not strong, confident, with a pelt as black as a moonless night. For a heartbeat, she had felt a spark of hope, a dizzying, impossible warmth. Then he had looked at her. Really looked at her. His handsome face had twisted into a mask of disgust, his lip curling back from his teeth. The words he had spoken in front of the entire pack still echoed in her soul, a phantom torment that never faded. I, Kale, future alpha of the Shadow Moon pack, reject you, Elara, as my mate and future Luna. He had boomed, his voice laced with a cruel power that had buckled her knees. I will not be saddled with a weak, cursed Omega. This pack will not be tainted by a flawed bloodline. You are a blemish, a walking misfortune, and I want nothing to do with you. The collective gasp of the pack had been followed by murmurs of agreement. No one had defended her. No one had met her pleading eyes. The mate bond, so new and bright, had shattered inside her chest, a physical agony that had left her breathless on the ground. The pain had been so immense, so all-consuming, that she had thought she might die right there on the ceremonial stones. In a way, a part of her had. The girl who had dared to hope was gone, replaced by this hollow shell, this ghost that now haunted the edges of the territory. After her mother's death, Kale's father, Alpha Borin, had formally exiled her. He had called it an act of mercy, allowing her to live in the dilapidated hunter's cabin on the far border of their lands. But she knew it for what it was. He was hiding his pack's shame. She was permitted to scavenge, to exist, but not to be seen. Her presence was a constant reminder of Kale's unfortunate mate, a story they preferred to forget. So she survived, barely. The winters were the hardest. Food was scarce, and the cabin was little more than a collection of rotting logs with a leaky roof. The cold was a living thing, a predator that stalked her relentlessly. Some days, she wondered why she bothered. The emptiness inside her was a frozen lake, vast and deep. It would be so easy to just lie down in the snow and let the cold take her, to finally be at peace. To be with her mother. "I'm so tired." "Mama," she whispered, her breath fogging in the frigid air. "I don't know how much longer I can do this." A sudden violent sound ripped through the quiet forest, shattering the mournful peace. A snarl, deep and guttural, followed by the sharp crack of bone and a pained yelp. It was close, too close. Her instincts screamed at her to run, to shift and flee back to the relative safety of her hovel. Rogues. They sometimes hunted near the borders, desperate and savage. They would tear an omega like her to shreds without a second thought. Fear, cold and sharp, lanced through her. She scrambled to her feet, her heart hammering against her ribs. But then she heard another sound, a whine of pure agony that cut through the brutal noises of the fight. It was a sound of suffering, and it resonated with the constant ache in her own soul. Her mother's voice whispered in her memory, a lesson taught so many times in their short life together. "Compassion is not a weakness, my little moonbeam. It is the greatest strength a wolf can possess." Against every instinct for self-preservation, she found herself moving toward the sound. She crept through the snow-laden pines, her movements silent, a lifetime of making herself invisible serving her well. Peeking through the dense branches of a fir tree, she saw the scene. 3 large, mangy rogues, their pelts matted with dirt and old blood, were circling a 4th wolf. But it was the 4th wolf that stole her breath. He was magnificent. He was enormous, larger than any wolf she had ever seen, with a build that spoke of pure, condensed power, and his fur, it was white. Not the dull, almost grayish white of her own coat, but a brilliant, pure white, like freshly fallen snow under a full moon. He was fighting with a ferocity that was terrifying to behold, but he was injured. A deep gash ran along his flank, staining his pristine fur with a shocking crimson, and his left foreleg buckled with every movement. The rogues were wearing him down, their attacks coordinated and vicious. They were using silver. She could smell the faint, acrid scent of it on the air, and she saw the dull glint of silver-dusted claws on one of the rogues. They weren't just fighting him, they were trying to kill him with poison. A cold fury, an emotion she hadn't felt in years, rose up inside her. It was a cowardly, dishonorable way to fight. Her mind screamed at her to leave. This was not her fight. Helping him would be suicide. But as one of the rogues lunged, sinking its teeth into the white wolf's injured leg, he let out another cry of pain, and something inside her snapped. She couldn't just stand by and watch. She couldn't let them do to him what her pack had done to her, destroy something beautiful simply because they could. With a silent prayer to a goddess she no longer believed in, Alara let her own shift take her. The change was quick, born of desperation. Bones cracked and reformed, her threadbare clothes falling away as her own small, pale form emerged. She was half the size of the rogues, a ghostly whisper of a wolf, but she was fast. She burst from the cover of the trees, a flash of white against white. The rogues were so focused on their primary target that they didn't see her coming. She launched herself at the smallest of the 3, her sharp omega teeth sinking into the scruff of his neck. She was no warrior, but she knew how to survive. She bit, twisted, and threw her weight, using his surprise against him. He yelped, shaking her off, but the distraction was enough. The great white wolf capitalized on the opening. With a roar that shook the very air, he surged forward, his massive jaws closing around the throat of the rogue who had injured his leg. There was a sickening crunch, and the rogue went limp, falling lifeless into the snow. One down, the other two turned their attention to Alara, their eyes burning with malice. They saw her for what she was, a weak omega, an easy kill. They lunged. She dodged, her small size making her an elusive target. She ducked under a swipe of claws that would have disemboweled her, the acrid smell of silver making her nose burn. As she scrambled away, the white wolf, despite his injuries, threw himself in front of her, shielding her with his body. He took a deep slash across his shoulder that was meant for her, his blood splattering onto her face. A protective growl rumbled from his chest, a sound so powerful it vibrated through her paws. He was protecting her. A stranger, a magnificent, powerful wolf was shielding a worthless omega. The thought was so staggering it almost paralyzed her, but there was no time to think. The remaining two rogues, perhaps realizing they were outmatched even with his injuries, hesitated. They exchanged a look, then turned and fled, melting back into the shadows of the forest. Silence descended, broken only by the ragged panting of the two wolves left in the snow-dusted clearing. The massive, white wolf stood for a moment, swaying on his feet, before his legs finally gave out. He collapsed onto the ground with a heavy thud, his breath coming in shallow, painful gasps. Alara rushed to his side, her brief surge of adrenaline fading, leaving her trembling. The gash on his flank was deep, and the wounds from the silver-laced claws were beginning to fester, the flesh around them turning a sickly gray. He was dying. She could smell the poison working its way through his system. She had to do something. The cabin. It was nearby. It wasn't much, but it was shelter, and she had a small store of herbs her mother had taught her to use. She nudged his great head with her nose. His eyes, a startling, intelligent silver, fluttered open and focused on her. There was no aggression in them, only a weary confusion and a flicker of gratitude. He was too weak to shift back, too weak to even stand. Summoning a strength she didn't know she possessed, Alara positioned herself, wedging her shoulder beneath his. "Get up," she urged, the command a mixture of growls and whimpers. "You have to get up." He seemed to understand. With a low groan of effort, he pushed with his uninjured legs, leaning his immense weight against her. She staggered, her own small frame groaning under the strain, but she held firm. Together, they stumbled through the snow, a slow, agonizing journey. He was a dead weight, and more than once, she thought they would both fall and freeze right there. But the image of his silver eyes, of the way he had protected her, spurred her on. It felt like an eternity before they reached the dilapidated cabin. The door hung crookedly on one hinge, and the wind whistled through the gaps in the chinking, but it was out of the biting wind. With one final, desperate heave, she managed to get him inside before she collapsed beside him on the dirt floor, her lungs burning, her muscles screaming in protest. She didn't rest for long. Shifting back to her human form, ignoring the biting cold on her bare skin, she quickly donned the spare set of clothes she kept tucked in a corner. They were as patched and worn as the ones she'd ruined, but they were dry. Her hands worked with a frantic urgency. She stoked the embers in the small stone fireplace, coaxing a tiny, pathetic flame to life. It offered little warmth, but it was enough to heat a small pot of snow for water. She went to him, kneeling by his massive form. He was shivering, his breaths growing more shallow. The poison was taking hold. She gently cleaned his wounds with the warm water and a strip of her own tunic, her touch as gentle as she could make it. The silver burns were the worst. They sizzled faintly as she cleaned them, and he let out a low, pained whine that tore at her heart. "Shh, it's all right," she found herself murmuring, her voice rough from disuse. "I'll help you. Just hold on." She rummaged through her small collection of dried herbs, her mother's legacy. She found what she was looking for, a small pouch of ground moon petal and wraith root. It wasn't a cure for silver poisoning, not a true one, but it could slow its progress, draw some of it from the wound. She mixed it into a paste with the last of her bear grease and began to carefully apply it to his injuries. As she worked, she talked. The words just came, a torrent of loneliness and pain pouring out of her into the quiet of the cabin. She confessed everything to the unconscious wolf, her voice a low, trembling whisper. "I don't know why I'm helping you," she admitted, her hands smearing the poultice over the angry red gash on his flank. "No one has ever helped me, not since my mother died. They all think I'm a curse." "My own mate?" He looked at me like I was something he'd scraped off his boot. He threw me away in front of everyone, and they all agreed with him. A single tear traced a path through the grime on her cheek, freezing almost instantly in the Singer cold air. Sometimes I think he was right. Maybe I am a curse. Everything I touch seems to wither. My father died before I was born. My mother got sick. My pack, they despise me. And now you. You were so strong, so beautiful, and you got hurt because of me. You shielded me. She finished dressing his wounds, then covered him with her own thin, threadbare blanket. It was all she had. She curled up on the floor beside him, sharing her own meager body heat, her small hand resting on the thick fur of his neck. His presence, even unconscious and wounded, was a comfort. He was the first living creature to show her kindness, however brief, in a very long time. "Please don't die," she whispered into his fur, her eyes growing heavy. "I don't think I could bear to be alone again." With that final, desperate plea, exhaustion finally claimed her, and she fell into a deep, troubled sleep. Alara awoke with a start, her heart pounding. It wasn't the cold that had woken her, or a bad dream. It was a sound. Voices, male voices, low and urgent, just outside the cabin, and the scent, power. It rolled off them in waves, pure, unadulterated alpha power that made her omega instinct scream at her to submit, to flatten herself on the ground and show her throat. Panic seized her. They had found her. The rogues had come back with reinforcements. Or worse, it was Alpha Boron's enforcers, come to finally rid the pack of her worthless presence. She scrambled backwards, pressing herself against the far wall of the cabin, trying to make herself as small as possible. Her eyes darted to the white wolf. He was still unconscious, his breathing still shallow. She had failed. They would kill him, and then they would kill her. The rickety cabin door was kicked open, splintering from its last hinge and crashing to the floor. 3 enormous men filled the doorway, blocking out what little light the gray morning offered. They were dressed in dark, functional armor, and they moved with the lethal grace of seasoned warriors. The man in the center, his face set in a grim, granite-like mask, scanned the tiny hovel. His eyes, the color of hardened steel, swept past her and then locked onto the form of the white wolf on the floor. A collective sigh of relief, sharp and profound, passed between the men. "He's alive," the leader breathed, his voice a deep baritone that rumbled with authority. He took a step inside, his gaze finally landing on her. He stared at her, huddled and terrified against the wall, and his eyes narrowed in confusion and suspicion. "Who are you?" he demanded. Before Alara could force her paralyzed tongue to work, a groan came from the floor. The great white wolf stirred. His massive head lifted, and those startling silver eyes blinked open. He looked at the warriors in the doorway, then his gaze found her. He held it for a long moment, an unreadable expression on his face. Then, the impossible happened. A shimmering aura of energy enveloped him, and the air in the tiny cabin grew thick with power, crackling like lightning. His form began to shift and change, not with the violent cracking of a normal shift, but with a smooth, fluid grace that defied belief. The pure white fur receded, bones elongated and reformed, and where the magnificent wolf had been, a man now lay. He was naked, his body a canvas of lean, powerful muscle, littered with the wounds she had tended. But it was his face that held her captive. It was a face carved from royalty, with a strong jaw, high cheekbones, and a cascade of hair as brilliantly white as his wolf's fur. He pushed himself into a sitting position, his movements stiff with pain, and the silver eyes that met hers were the same piercing, intelligent, and radiating an authority that dwarfed that of the warriors in the doorway. It dwarfed the authority of any alpha she had ever known. The three warriors immediately dropped to one knee, their heads bowed in absolute reverence. "Your Majesty," the leader said, his voice thick with emotion. "We feared the worst. Your Majesty." The words echoed in the stunned silence of Alara's mind. "King, this was no ordinary wolf. This was Theron, the Alpha King, ruler of all the packs in the Northern Territories, a figure of myth and legend, who was said to be as powerful as a storm and as old as the mountains. And she had found him bleeding to death in the snow. King Theron's gaze never left her. "We were ambushed," he said, his voice a calm, deep river of power that flowed over her, soothing the frantic terror in her heart. "Assassins. They used silvered weapons. I managed to kill them, but the poison, it was potent. I would have died out there if not for her." He nodded his head toward Alara, who was still frozen against the wall, unable to process what was happening. The lead warrior, who she now assumed was his beta or commander, looked at her again, his expression shifting from suspicion to shock and dawning respect. "This? Omega?" he asked, his disbelief evident. "She fought off 3 rogues who came to finish the job," Theron continued, his voice unwavering. "She brought me here. She tended my wounds. She saved my life." He tried to stand, but winced, a hand going to the gash on his side. "Garrus, my tunic." The warrior named Garrus quickly shed his own outer cloak and handed it to his king, who wrapped it around his waist. Theron then turned his full attention back to Alara. He looked at her, truly looked, and in that moment, the world tilted on its axis. A jolt, like a lightning strike, shot through her, a brilliant, searing heat that chased away the perpetual cold in her bones. It was 1,000 times more powerful than what she had felt with Kale. It was a tidal wave of warmth, of belonging, of home, the mate bond. It slammed into her with the force of a physical blow. Theron's silver eyes widened, a flare of incandescent light in their depths. He felt it too. He took a staggering step toward her, his face a mask of utter astonishment and something else, something that looked like reverence. "You," he breathed, the word full of wonder. "It's you." Alara's world shattered for the second time in her life. But this time, it wasn't from the pain of rejection. It was from the sheer, terrifying impossibility of it all. The Alpha King. The most powerful wolf in existence. Her mate. The denial was a reflexive, desperate thing, clawing its way up her throat. "No," she whispered, shaking her head, the motion frantic. "No, it can't be. You're mistaken. The moon goddess does not make mistakes," he said, his voice soft but absolute. He took another step closer, his presence filling the tiny cabin, making it feel both smaller and infinitely safer. "But I'm a curse," she stammered, the old hateful words tumbling from her lips. "I'm a worthless omega, an albino. I was rejected. I'm broken. You can't be mated to me. It's impossible." She hugged her knees to her chest, trying to physically hold herself together as the fragile walls of her existence crumbled around her. Theron stopped a few feet from her. His expression softened, the sheer power in his face giving way to a look of profound empathy that reached into the coldest, most broken parts of her. "Broken?" he repeated, his voice gentle. "I see nothing broken." He gestured around the small cabin, at the poultice on his wounds, the thin blanket that had covered him. "I see a she-wolf who, with nothing to her name, faced down rogues to save a stranger. I see a heart so compassionate it offered its last blanket, its last bit of healing salve, its last dregs of warmth to someone she did not know. You call that worthless? I call it strength. The strength of a true queen." Queen. The word was so absurd she almost laughed, a hysterical sound that died in her throat. "You don't understand," she pleaded, tears welling in her eyes. "My own pack threw me away because of how I look. This white fur, these eyes, they said it was a taint on the bloodline. A shadow passed over the king's face, a flicker of cold fury that made the temperature in the room seem to drop. Then, your pack was led by fools," he stated, his voice ringing with indisputable authority. "Blind, ignorant fools." He reached up and ran a hand through his own stark white hair. "In the royal line, this is not a curse. It is a mark of the moon's favor, a sign of ancient power. They cast out a blessing because they were too small-minded to recognize its worth." He knelt before her, his movements slow and deliberate, giving her time to flee if she wished. But she was rooted to the spot, mesmerized by the sincerity in his silver eyes. "My name is Theron," he said softly, "and I have waited centuries for a mate, with a heart as pure and strong as yours. I have waited for you, Ilara." He knew her name. She must have said it in her sleep, or in her one-sided conversation with him as a wolf. Hearing it from his lips felt different. It sounded like a prayer, not a curse. He turned his head to his guards, who were still kneeling, their expressions a mixture of awe and shock. "Garrus," Theron commanded, his voice regaining its regal edge, though his eyes never left Ilara. "Send word to the palace. Prepare the Luna's chambers. My mate is coming home." He then looked back at her, his expression softening once more. "And send word to the Shadow Moon pack. Inform their alpha that I have found something he lost, and that he will answer to me for how he treated it." The journey to the royal palace was a blur. Ilara was wrapped in a thick, fur-lined cloak that smelled of pine and ozone, of him. She was carried by Garrus, who treated her as if she were made of spun glass, his earlier suspicion replaced by a fierce, protective reverence. Theron, despite his injuries, insisted on walking beside them, his presence a constant, reassuring warmth. The palace was not a building. It was a fortress carved into the heart of a mountain, a breathtaking structure of white stone and gleaming silver that seemed to touch the clouds. It radiated power and permanence, a stark contrast to the transient, fragile existence she had always known. She was led through vast halls with soaring ceilings, past tapestries depicting legendary battles and stern-faced royal ancestors. Servants bowed as they passed, their eyes wide with curiosity as they took in the sight of their formidable king escorting a small, pale, and utterly terrified Omega. The Luna's chambers were bigger than her entire cabin, bigger than any space she had ever been in. A fire roared in a massive marble fireplace, chasing the chill from the air. The bed was a mountain of soft furs and plush velvet, and an adjoining room held a steaming bath filled with scented water. Clothes were laid out for her, gowns of silk and wool in shades of silver, white, and pale blue, softer than anything she had ever touched. It was too much. The luxury, the respect, the sheer unreality of it all was overwhelming. After a long, hot bath that scrubbed away years of grime and left her skin pink and glowing, she dressed in a simple silver gown and stared at her reflection in a full-length mirror. She saw the same girl, too thin, with hair like snow and eyes the color of faded roses. But for the first time, she wasn't sure if she was seeing a curse. Theron's words echoed in her mind. A mark of the moon's favor. Over the next few days, Theron began a slow, patient campaign to heal not just her body, but her soul. He knew she was a wild, wounded creature, and that any sudden move would send her scurrying back into the shadows of her own fear. He never pushed, never demanded. He simply was there. He would invite her to join him for meals in his private dining room, not the great hall. The food was plentiful and delicious, and she, who had known near starvation for so long, ate with a quiet, desperate hunger she couldn't hide. He never commented on it, only made sure her plate was always full. He told her stories of his long life, of the packs he governed, of the history of their people. He spoke of the mate bond as a sacred gift, a partnership of two souls meant to make each other whole. He took her to the royal library, a vast circular room filled with thousands of scrolls and leather-bound books. He watched, a small, pleased smile on his face, as her eyes lit up with a wonder she couldn't conceal. Her mother had taught her to read, a rare skill for an Omega, and it had been her only escape. "You may read any of these you wish," he told her, his voice a low rumble beside her. Knowledge should not be hoarded. She ran a trembling hand over the spine of a book on ancient healing arts. "My mother was a healer," she said, her voice barely a whisper. It was the first time she had volunteered a piece of information about herself. "Tell me about her," Theron prompted gently, and so she did. She told him about Lyra's kindness, her skill with herbs, her fierce love. She spoke of her lonely childhood, hidden away from the other pack children. And, her voice trembling, she finally told him the full story of Cale's rejection, of the words he used, of the bone-deep shame that had been her constant companion ever since. Theron listened without interruption, his silver eyes dark with a controlled rage. When she finished, her story hanging in the quiet air between them, he reached out and took her hand. His touch was warm and firm, a solid anchor in the swirling sea of her emotions. "He did not break you, Alara," he said, his voice imbued with a certainty that defied argument. "He only revealed his own weakness, his fear. He was afraid of a power he could not understand, and so he tried to destroy it. But he failed. Despite his kindness, despite the undeniable pull of the bond that hummed between them like a living current, the fear remained. It was a cold knot of dread in her stomach. This felt like a dream, a beautiful, impossible fantasy from which she would inevitably wake. How could he, the Alpha King, truly want her, a nobody, a rejected Omega? The fear of being cast aside again was a terror far greater than any rogue or winter storm. She was afraid to hope, because she didn't think she could survive her heart being shattered a second time. She would wake in the middle of the night, gasping for breath, the phantom pain of the broken bond with Cale aching in her chest. She was terrified that Theron would grow tired of her, that he would see the frightened, worthless creature she truly was and realize his mistake. The palace felt like a gilded cage, and she was just a drab little bird waiting for the door to be opened and for her to be cast out into the cold once more. One afternoon, as she was sitting in the gardens, trying to soak in a rare moment of winter sun, Theron came to her. He didn't speak for a long time, simply sat on the stone bench beside her. "You are still afraid," he stated, not as a question but as a simple fact. She nodded, unable to meet his eyes, focusing instead on a hardy snowdrop pushing its way through the frozen earth. "I don't know how to be this person," she confessed. "The one you see. I've been the other thing for so long. The curse, the outcast. It's all I know." "Then we will learn together," he said simply. "I will show you who you are, until you can see it for yourself." He paused, his gaze thoughtful. "The annual allegiance ceremony is in 3 days. The alphas of all the northern packs will be here to renew their fealty to the crown. Alpha Borin and his son, Kyle, will be among them." Ice flooded Ilara's veins. Kyle, here. The thought of seeing him again made her physically ill. The old fear, the shame, it all came rushing back, a suffocating tide. "No," she gasped, rising to her feet. I can't face him. Please, don't make me." Theron rose with her, his large frame a bulwark against her rising panic. He gently took her by the shoulders. "I will not force you to do anything, Ilara, but you cannot hide from your past forever. To truly be free of it, you must face it, and you will not face it alone. I will be by your side." His silver eyes bored into hers, filled with a promise of unwavering support. Let him see what he threw away. The day of the allegiance ceremony arrived, cold and gray. Ilara felt as if she were walking to her own execution. The palace staff had dressed her in a gown of shimmering white silk that seemed to glow with its own inner light. Her pale hair was woven with delicate silver threads. They had called her beautiful, ethereal. All she saw in the mirror was a ghost playing dress-up. Theron stood beside her on the dais, in the great thorn hall, his hand resting reassuringly on the small of her back. He was a breathtaking sight in his formal black and silver armor, the crown of the north on his white hair. He was every inch the powerful king he was, and she felt like a fraud standing next to him. The alphas entered one by one, kneeling before the throne and speaking the ancient words of fealty. Ilara kept her eyes down, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. Then she smelled it, that familiar scent of pine and arrogance, the scent of Kael. She looked up against her will. There he was. Alpha Borin led the way, but her eyes were drawn to Kael, walking a step behind him. He was just as handsome as she remembered, his black hair gleaming, his shoulders broad and confident. He hadn't changed at all. Their turn came. Borin knelt, but Kael's eyes were scanning the court. They passed over her, then snapped back, a flicker of disbelief in their dark depths. He didn't recognize her at first. He saw a beautiful, pale she-wolf standing beside the king, a position of honor. Alpha Borin spoke the oath, his voice steady. Then it was Kale's turn to step forward. As he did, his eyes locked with hers, and recognition finally dawned. His jaw went slack, his confident swagger vanishing. He saw her, Alara, the rejected Omega, the curse. Standing beside the Alpha King, his shock quickly curdled into rage and a possessive jealousy that was utterly insane. He forgot where he was. He forgot who he was speaking to. He pointed a trembling finger at her. "You!" he snarled, his voice echoing in the suddenly silent hall. "What are you doing here? This is no place for pack filth." He took a step toward the dais, a proprietary fury in his eyes. "Did you run here to become some high-born wolf's whore? You belong to the Shadow Moon Pack. You are my rejected filth, and I will not have you shaming us here." He started to move toward the steps, his hand outstretched as if to grab her and drag her away. Before he could take another step, a wave of power slammed into him, so immense and suffocating that it dropped him to his knees, as if he'd been struck by a hammer. Alpha Boran and the other Shadow Moon wolves were forced to their knees as well, gasping for air under the crushing weight of the king's fury. Theron had not moved. He still stood beside Alara, his hand on her back, but the air around him had turned lethal. His silver eyes were no longer calm. They were twin vortexes of glacial rage. "You dare," he said, his voice terrifyingly quiet, yet it carried to every corner of the vast hall. "You dare come into my hall and speak to your queen in such a manner." Kale choked, his face pale with shock and terror as he finally understood. Queen?" he stammered, looking from Alara to Theron and back again. That is not possible. She is a worthless, cursed Omega. The only curse I see here is the blindness that afflicts your bloodline." Theron's voice cracked like a whip. "The moon goddess gifted you with a treasure, a mate with more courage, compassion, and strength in her little finger than you possess in your entire worthless body. And you, in your arrogance and ignorance, threw her away. You called her a blemish. You are the blemish, Kale of Shadow Moon. A stain on the title of Alpha." Theron stepped forward, looming over the groveling wolf. "She saved my life. She fought for me when she had nothing. She showed me the heart of a true Luna. You saw a flaw. I found my destiny. You cast her out into the cold, and in doing so, you sent her directly to me. For that, at least, I should thank you. You are too much of a fool to have ever deserved her." He let the crushing pressure ease slightly. "Your pack is on probation," Theron declared, his voice ringing with finality. "You will return to your lands, and you will reflect on your failings. And if I ever hear that you have spoken her name with anything less than the absolute reverence she is due, I will personally unmake your pack, stone by stone. Now get out of my sight." Humiliated and terrified, Kale and his father scrambled to their feet and all but fled the throne hall, the eyes of every other alpha burning into their backs. A profound silence remained. Theron turned back to Alara. She was crying, not tears of fear or shame, but of pure, cathartic release. The weight she had carried for years, the shame, the feeling of worthlessness, it was all washing away in the face of his absolute, public defense of her. He had not just defended her, he had championed her. He had shown everyone the truth. She looked at him, at this magnificent king who saw a queen where everyone else had seen a curse. The last of her fear, the last of her doubt, crumbled into dust. The cold, frozen lake inside her, finally, completely, thawed. Later that evening, Theron found her on the balcony of her chambers, looking out at the moonlit, snow-covered peaks. The air was crisp and cold, but for the first time, it didn't make her feel desolate. It felt clean, new. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice a soft rumble behind her. She turned to face him, a real smile, perhaps the first of her adult life, touching her lips. "I am more than all right," she said, her voice clear and steady. The trembling, frightened Omega was gone. In her place stood a woman who was finally beginning to understand her own worth. "He can't hurt me anymore," she said, the realization settling deep in her bones. "His words, they're just noise now. You broke his power over me." "I broke nothing," Theron corrected gently, stepping closer until he was only a breath away. "I only held up a mirror to show you the strength that was always there." She looked up into his silver eyes, seeing her own reflection there. She saw not a curse, but a survivor. She saw a queen. The mate bond pulsed between them, a warm, steady, and joyous thing. All her hesitation was gone, replaced by a certainty that was as deep and solid as the mountain itself. "I accept the bond, Theron," she said, her voice ringing with conviction. "I choose you, willingly, with all my heart." A look of profound relief and joy washed over his regal features. He cupped her face in his large, warm hands, his thumbs gently stroking her cheeks. "And I choose you, Alara," he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion he had held in check for centuries. "My moonbeam, my queen, my home." He lowered his head and kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion, not yet, but one of promise. It was a kiss of healing, of acceptance, of two broken halves finally becoming whole. It tasted of safety and starlight, of winter yielding to spring. It was the feeling of coming home after a lifetime lost in the cold. Sparks of pure magic seemed to dance on her skin, and the bond between them flared, sealing itself into something eternal and unbreakable. Their formal mating ceremony was held a month later, under the light of a full moon. Alara stood beside her king, her mate, not as a trembling outcast, but as his equal. She wore a crown of silver and moonstones that matched his, and as she looked out at the assembled alphas of the northern packs, she felt no fear. She met their gazes with a quiet confidence that was more powerful than any alpha's snarl. Her past was not a source of shame, but a wellspring of empathy. As Luna Queen, she used her position to champion the outcasts, the Omegas, the forgotten members of every pack. She established sanctuaries for those who had been abused or rejected, ensuring that no one would suffer the loneliness and despair that she had. Her compassion, once seen as a weakness, became the bedrock of their reign, tempering Theron's immense power with a gentle wisdom that earned them the love and loyalty of all their people. Sometimes, she would walk to the edge of the mountain fortress and look out toward the distant lands of the Shadow Moon Pack. She felt no anger, no bitterness, only a quiet pity for Kale, who in his blindness had thrown away the greatest gift the goddess could offer. His rejection had not been her end. It had been a painful, necessary detour that had led her down the path to her true destiny, to a love greater than she had ever imagined, and to the woman she was always meant to be. She was Alara, the White Wolf Queen, and she was finally home.